Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Reverend Jean-Marie, and I serve as the Director for Racial Justice Ministries at Scarritt Bennett Center here in Nashville, Tennessee. And I am excited about this afternoon because, again, we get to present to you a live conversation. This afternoon, our conversation is entitled, oh man, I forgot that I completely went blank on our title, Lewis. That's because we changed it several times. But I am excited about this conversation as it relates to justice work, because oftentimes when we talk about justice work, we try to aim for the racial component. And last week, we talked about the intersectionality work. We talk about the racial components oftentimes, which is very important. And I think we often talk about gender and sexuality, which is also great. This afternoon specifically is talking about a group of people who are often othered, left out, forgotten. And I thought it was important that we brought in the voices of the trans community in this conversation. Scarritt Bennett Center have been doing the work of shifting the narrative to present to our audience what it means to be a co-conspirator, what it means to be a co-conspirator. And a co-conspirator, again, is an active agent of change, someone who is actively trying to live their lives, pursuing the work of justice, doing the work of dismantling systems, dismantling attitudes, dismantling white supremacy. And white supremacy, let me say, is the foundation of every injustice that we experience. And so this is not far from the work that we need to do to create a world where everyone feels safe, where everyone experiences the kind of justice and equality that allow for us to live in a world, that a beloved community, a world where we're all safe. So I, again, want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon as we present to you Let Us Live the Sheer Audacity of Integrity, the sheer audacity of integrity. As usual, this is sacred space and everyone is welcome to the conversation. We invite you to enter the conversation as a co-conspirator. And what that means is co-conspirators recognize that they come to listen, to learn, to do their own self-reflection. And so we invite you to not be quick to ask questions, but to sit with your questions and to find an accountability partner to ask those questions with them, that you might do the work together. But we do invite your questions. Our guest this afternoon is eager to engage you around this conversation. Let us live the sheer audacity of integrity. And let me say, difference of opinion are always welcome, but particularly with this conversation, there's some difference is a level of, that brings a level of violence that we do not want to bring in this conversation. So we want you to enter this conversation with the kind of care and respect, in love and justice that it is deemed in this space. So we invite you to ask your questions, but we also want to let you know that difference of opinion does not mean disrespect or hate. And so any comments or questions that reflect difference, disrespect or hate, we will delete immediately. And so again, we want to thank you all so much for joining us. And I want to personally thank each and every one of our panelists for being here. Some are celebrating birthdays. Actually, 3 of us are celebrating birthdays. My birthday was Tuesday. Lewis' birthday was yesterday, and Mo's birthday is today. So let me say happy birthday to you all, and thank you for celebrating your special day with us. It is my honor to introduce our moderator, Reverend Lewis Mitchell. Just met him this year, literally in person. Was it this year we met in person when you came to New Covenant? Yeah, earlier this year. Was it late last year? Anyway, a new friendship that I'm excited to have. So thank you so much for accepting this invitation to moderate this conversation. And I want to turn it over to you as you frame the conversation and share with us your beautiful journey of becoming. Thank you again and have a great one. I turn it over to you, Lewis.
Good morning and afternoon to you all. It is a joy and an honor to spend this celebratory time in my life with people who I admire and care for, people whose journeys continue to inspire me. This conversation, in my memory, somewhat came about because there was some notion that folks don't really know trans people. I'm like, well, we're everywhere. I don't know how you could miss us. Just because we don't disclose doesn't mean we aren't your neighbors and your friends and your pastor and your therapist and your mail delivery person and your masseuse. We're everywhere. But I thought this opportunity to recognize this group's experience of who we are and how we came into being was an important first step. I will say that each of us shares our stories, and much like the Black community, there is no monolithic story of transness. We each have our stories and our experience and our journeys that we are sharing with you. I also want to lift up that it is both a courageous act to share these stories with you because most of the violence that we suffer is, like most communities, intraracial violence. It is not the man, well, it's not the white man. It is intraracial. And so the abuse that we suffer most often is from our families and our kin and our churches and our neighbors. And so there's a vulnerability in sharing who we are with you um, that we step into with great courage. And the idea of audacity, the sheer audacity of integrity, for me means that we dare to tell you exactly who we are, and we invite you to join us in this relationship rather than deciding to rebut who we are based on what you think. And that has been a big challenge for us. So I want to begin by introducing my panelists very briefly. They will introduce themselves. Reverend Eunice Coleman from New York. They're going to introduce themselves, each of them. But there are people on this panel that it's not a casual panel. Mo, who I've just met, I'm just going to go ahead and adopt. But each and every other person on this panel, I already have a relationship with, and I was specific about inviting them because of their gifts, because of their journey, their transparency, their integrity. They are without parallel in a world that has all the titles and none of the titles. If I were to choose people for any reason, whether they were trans or not, I would choose these same people because of their integrity and their wisdom. MX Renee Taylor, a longtime friend, and I would say one of the most unsung activists in the region, specifically around non-binary and gender non-conforming visibility in Black communities. And I'm trying to figure out who to say. I'm going to start with you, Carmarian, Mrs. Carmarian, a long time friend whom I adore. I would say we've already moved into family now, who has taken on some new roles with a national organization. But before this national organization, has spent so much time on the ground, not just speaking about how to be in integrity about oneself, but exemplifying that as a mother, as a grandmother, as a partner, as a church member and a minister, just showing up and doing the work that is so critical to say, we don't have to make an announcement, we just gonna do the work. And so I thank you for that. And my sibling, Reverend Shania, whom I love beyond words. I could go on and on, but that would take up the entire time. But there is something in your spirit that moves and motivates me to want to be a better person so that I can be on par with you. I want to rise up to your level. So that's where I'm going with that. I am called to share a little bit about my journey and process of becoming, and I want to make it really quick because I want more space for each of our panelists. I just turned 60 yesterday, for which I'm truly grateful. So many of my kindred did not get to see 25 or 30 or 35 or 40 or any of those things. I am also 36 years in recovery, which is probably part of why I turned 60. From the time I was 3 or 4 years old, I knew that how I was being identified was not how I saw myself. And in my world, there was no such thing as a trans man. There were trans women, Renee Richards and other people, mostly white women who had been in the media in some way, but there was literally no such thing as a trans man. So I fashioned in my own mind a way to see myself that allowed me to move through the world with relative comfort. But it meant that I was always wearing a mask and that I could never let anyone get close enough to really know me. Because if I shared who I was, you wouldn't love me. That was my fear. My fear also became my reality, and my reality and that fear also became my strength. When I transitioned 22 years ago, um, I lost friends and I gained friends. But the most important thing that I gained was a sense of integrity and joy. If you've never had the experience of having your insides and your outsides suddenly match, then you won't know what I'm talking about. But there's a way in which I filled out my presence in the world in a different way, without fear, without anger, without shame, just wholeness. And that's really all I ever wanted, was wholeness. I call myself a holy hybrid. I believe that my journey, being embodied and identified as a woman, has framed the kind of man that I am. And I hope that it has framed it in very possible, in ways that allow me to be a different kind of man that's more thoughtful and less rooted in misogyny, which doesn't mean I don't have to question my own misogyny, but it does mean that I have a backstory that allows me to see things through a different lens. I am happily a son. I am here with my mother in shelter. I am a father. My daughter is 8 years old. I am a loving partner to my lady friend whom I adore. And I am joyous in my family relationships. I am one of the blessed ones. My family did not throw me away, and I didn't throw them away. And I consider that a blessing. I am going to pass on to the birthday person, Mo, if you would please begin your introduction.
Thank you so much for that. My name is Mo Brown. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist by profession. And where do I even begin? I want to echo so many of Lewis's sentiments, but I will keep the conversation growing. But I felt so deeply connected and emotional listening to Lewis begin talking, and it made me realize why I'm here, even like on my birthday. This moment is so self-reflective, and that's why. Um, because when I think about being in transition, I think about the process of being born and reborn, and it almost feels like that's what has happened in my life. I've gotten to know myself in so many new and inspiring ways. And that's been such a big part of my work. The thing that stands out a lot to me is that in the process of transitioning for me, I've gotten really comfortable with the process, but that was not always easy. So much of the process was me in the beginning wanting to do it, get it over with, and then re-enter public and be like, I am me now. Finally, I'm in alignment. Now love me. And then I realized that one, we're kind of always transitioning, or we're always becoming more of who we are. So this becoming word just feels so accurate for what this process looks like. And so it has been a journey of me getting really comfortable with that I'm always going to be evolving, that there probably isn't an endpoint that I might arrive at just because of who I am as a person, but also feeling more comfortable to invite other people into that, to receive love from people and not make that assumption that Lewis talked about, which is that people are going to reject me. I very much resonated with that. I carried some of that even to this day, that sometimes it's hard for me to open up. So my process has been a lot of an internal process of alignment with who I am, but also this openness to receiving love from people as I am right now, who I'm becoming, who I've been in the past, and all of those people, which are the same person at the same time. So that's my process. And I'll leave it there, and I look forward to sharing more as we go along.
I feel like we need a month of these because I just want to know more and more about each of you. Um, Renee, if you would go next, please.
Hello, all. I am Renee Taylor. I use they, them, and their pronouns. I am a 45-year-old non-binary, Black, disabled, asexual, demisexual entity. I'm originally from a small town in Northeast Mississippi called Tupelo, Elvis's real hometown. I have, I'm from a large family. I have 6 sisters and brothers, and I am a direct middle child. My astrological sign is I'm a Pisces. So emotions kind of really rule my heart. As far as religion, I was raised as a Southern Baptist. So it seemed like every other Sunday, there was brimstone and damnation for anyone that was gay or outside of the binary. So for me, my connection to being spiritual, I consider myself a Christian on parole, because I walked away from religion for a while, because of the whole damnation and every other Sunday hearing those type of brimstone and damnation kind of sermons. And there you are in church, and you're there and you see a gay minister of music and things like that. And I always have felt like I don't want to be a part of the same oppression or be a part of it. So I kind of walked away from religion. I also do HIV advocacy and education in the South. And yeah, I wear a lot of hats. I'm a busy little bee. But for me, stepping away for a while, it really helped me be more confident. And also, I resonate with what Lewis said about, for a lot of us, our first enemies are people that are related to us. I'm not going to say family, I'm going to say relatives. And I have some I haven't seen in 20 years, because sometimes I wonder, through my quest of being an individual, why I don't have a relationship with these people. But also, I think, like Oscar Wilde said, they don't know what they're missing, because I'm a hell of a person to know. So that's a little about me.
Again, I wish we had all day because I know there's so much more. Reverend Shania, I will invite you to go next, please.
Thank you, my brother. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone. My name is the Reverend Shania D. Leonard. By paycheck, I am the National Associate for Gender and Racial Justice for the Presbyterian denomination. By purpose, I'm a 21st century abolitionist. I live my life through the lens of love and liberation in everything that I do. 2 particular phrases or sayings or verses that really have guided my journey. One is Assata Shakur's word that it's our duty to fight for our freedom. It's our duty to win. We must love one another, support one another, and we have nothing to lose but our chains. But then my journey has been informed by Micah 6 and 8. And what does the Lord require of you, O mortal? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. And so my journey has been governed tremendously by those 2 things. And I say that on purpose because not only in my paycheck, or i.e. in my job, is it for me to stand at the axis of gender and race, but also in how I see my journey is all about gender and race. Even from a young age, I remember being 5 years old and walking home from school and seeing the smoke from the only time in this country where the government has dropped a bomb on its own people, and the Move people, which was 3 blocks from my house. And that was partially about race. And that's when I started my journey to really look at where marginalized people are in this world, as much as a 5-year-old could, and then how I could be a part of that liberation movement. I remember when I came out and not feeling comfortable with the term lesbian. It didn't fit me. It didn't feel right. I wasn't no lesbian. I don't know what a lesbian is, but I knew it wasn't me. And so that was, and the reason why it didn't fit me is because of my gender identity. I am a gender non-conforming person, gender non-binary person. So I go by the pronouns of they, them. That's where I feel comfortable, and that's where my spirit and mind are housed most equally and most at peace and in harmony. And so now my whole life is built around the fact of how I can further
live into all that I am and all that I feel that God is calling me to help liberate somebody else? And then also, how can I share the burden of helping to liberate our people in all ways possible? I feel like that's my duty, that's my call in life, and however I walk that out, whether it's pastoring a church or working my 9 to 5 or bringing new discussions into my existence with even my people I surround myself with. And so I do not know all that I'm yet becoming, so a journey is still unfolding. But what I do know is that I'm called to make jokes because I love to laugh, to lead people and do justice work, and to also cook a good piece of chicken. That's what I'm called to do, and that's part of my journey.
You know what? That chicken, that's clearly of God. I'm sorry, vegetarians and vegans, I apologize. Y'all get God too. My bad.
I make a mean Brussels sprout too.
Okay, all right. Chicken and Brussels sprout. We got everybody covered. I am going to ask Reverend Yoon to go next because I feel like I've journeyed the longest in this battle with Reverend Carmarian. So I'm going to save you for last. So Reverend Yoon and then Carmarian.
Yes, good afternoon, morning, whatever time it is, wherever you are. I am Reverend Eunice Coldman. People are calling me you or Yoon, and which is fine. I'm also known as Pops in the community now. And I can't tell you how much that tears me up. It really does, because I feel like Pops in this community, and I like being that. I love it when people come to me that way. I guess I'll just start out by saying that I am an ordained interfaith minister, and I loved everything everybody was saying, because there were bits and pieces of me in all of this, which is wonderful, because there was a time when I couldn't find bits and pieces of myself anywhere, right? Because I could not, for a predominance of my life, figure out who I was. And then one day I was at a conference with some people, and I tell the story all the time because it is the center of who I am. I was at a conference and I was sitting at a table with a bunch of people who I did not know. And all of a sudden, it seemed like I knew these people from somewhere already, even though I knew that technically I had not ever met them. And I could not figure out what that thing was in each of these people that I was sitting at this huge table with. And I realized later on from word of mouth that I was sitting at a table with trans people. And my heart just swelled and opened. And I don't think that Carmarion realizes that she was sitting at that table that day. This is the first time you may have heard this, but it was you, it was Lewis, and it was a few other people whose names I will not mention. And it was like something went off in my mind. And I said to myself, this is it. This is who I've been looking for all this time. And it brings me to tears still to this day, because at that moment, I was in my 50s. I had done an enormous amount of things in life, things that I loved. I was an opera singer. I was a dramatic soprano. I aspired to be the next Leontyne Price. I had done a multitude of things already in my life, but there was always that one thing that I could not quite figure out. And I will even say this, I was a notorious lesbian, okay? But it still was not quite right. It's that whole concept of the shoes being on the wrong foot, right? And once I got the shoes right, I was off and running. I vowed in that moment when I realized, when that light went off, when that mind, body, spirit, emotions all began to kind of come in sync with one another, I was like, okay, I hit the ground running, and I have not stopped since. But one of the things that I knew for a fact was that God was speaking to me in that moment as well. God was saying, come unto me, And I said, okay, here I come, I'm walking. But I knew that there was a work also to be done. And that work and a part that who I was in that work. And ever since then, I have been in the trenches as best as I can. I do it my way. I'm not the same as everybody else. I'm a Capricorn. I like mentioning that because I have a specific way that I like that my mind works. And I try to use that. The spiritual upbringing and background that I have and all of that to do for my community in ways that it can't do for itself because of all the things that we have talked about, all the things that have kept us from getting it done. And that is why now here I am 62 years old in my transition. Now I love that I now have a new title and that title is Pops. There's something about that has made, it's almost like, okay, here I am. And so I'll just leave it right there. But yes, it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey. And I'm so glad to continue it. Absolutely. Thank you.
I remember that table. It was a magical time for all of us. Yes. And so, Minister Carmarian, I've saved you for last because of all the folks on this panel, you and I have journeyed together the longest. I am always, I think you must have started when you were like 12, because I feel like we've been doing this for, 30 years and you still 30. So I can't figure out how this all comes together, but you have done amazing work, especially when you weren't working. Like there's work you've done, but the work that I've seen you do when you were off the clock and just being you and just showing up and pressing through, those are the models that I lift up. Everybody's about branding these days, but before you get to branding, there is a show up that has to happen, and that you have consistently done throughout. And so I am deeply grateful to share this time with you. If you would take a few moments to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Louis, so much. What an honor. And to the other panelists, and Mo, I'm going to be like Louis, I'm going to adopt you. The others have been directly and indirectly colleagues with me throughout the years of being on the front line, or as Louis will say, as my motto, showing up to be counted. And so grateful to be on this panel. I am Carmarian D. Anderson Harvey. My pronouns is she and her. I am described as a coma macchiata. Lashes, curly hair, and today I have a blue stripes with the beautiful silver necklace on. More importantly as well, to my call, I am a Pentecostal preacher. And that leads me to a little bit about my journey and who I am. Currently, and I like what Pastor Shania stated, my 9-to-5 or the paycheck job. I work for the Human Rights Campaign as the Alabama State Director. I have been on board now 11 months. I moved from Texas to Alabama, the civil rights state, and it's been remarkably a wonderful experience to say the least. In addition to that, I left a field of almost 2 decades working in public health and education, where I still get a chance to dip and dab a little in it just because of my service years and my authorship on intervention. As well, I am still attached to my local home church, which is the Living Faith Covenant Church of Dallas. I am an elder there. I am also part of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, where I serve as a co-facilitator and South Regional Minister for our trans ministry called Trans Saints. And I am a wife. I am a mother of 1 son with 4 bonus sons. I'm a grandmother of 3. And my experience of this yet becoming, I have June of this year made 24 years of me living out my purpose. And I like to say it that way. And my story is interesting because you will never hear this woman of God and this woman of trans experience talk about, did I feel that I was trapped in the wrong body, or did God make a mistake? That isn't my narrative. I affirm those who narrative that it is. My narrative is very strong by me positioning myself with my honesty. And my honesty is I had a Saul moment when I was 16. And when I had that Saul moment, when my eyes opened up, I knew what my purpose was. And in order for that purpose to unveil itself, I had to walk in truth. And I had to walk in purpose. And so I started my journey at 16 and now I'm grandmother, won't tell you my age. It's been a remarkable experience. I am protected because of the horrific deaths that we see within the Black trans women community, but I'm protected, I believe, because of purpose. And like Lewis said, because I will show up when I'm not getting a paycheck or not, or if I have to sacrifice my time. I'm also protected in this particular call of being trans because it is attached to ministry, even when I'm doing amazing things and the people that I have help resurrect, no longer give credit where credit is due. I am still protected mentally. Y'all understand what I'm saying, right? You understand. And so I feel that my contribution to the conversation that we will have today is going to be really based off those that actually have that Black church experience, that have that kick out, and you realize that there is still something deep down in your spirit. It's Sunday and I miss church and I feel like preaching already. In your spirit that is resurrecting in you. I am a testament that once you have been changed, and I'm not talking about change because you already know what that change is, but walking out the change. And many people don't talk about that in the story of Saul when he turned to Paul. Paul started walking in the call, and that's how Paul became one of the greatest recruiting for discipleships in the New Testament. And so that is me, and I'm still yet becoming. And the reason I say that, because a lot of us are not fortunate. I have gone and I'm not without any short sticks of being a woman of trans experience. I own my privilege that I still enjoy to be at tables that really are not set for us. I enjoy when I can go into my traditional fundamental ministries, who is condemning us who are trans identified and gender non-conforming, and sit myself still until the Lord says time to open your mouth, and I build alliance with them, and I make a difference by showing up, being counted, so someone else who comes after me, they do not have to deal with the discrimination at hand. And finally, I'm honored to say that as a founder of a trans organization of Black trans women, where Renee and I have worked very religiously throughout the years, I am honored to say that that organization is a promising organization for trans women who is needing that level of support. And although I'm no longer the executive director, it has continued to go on with the new executive director of Diamond Kohler and two of the board members who are really fostering and supporting that initiative, which is Dee Dee Waters and Monica Roberts. And so there's a lot of things that I've contributed in, but one thing that I will leave you before we go with the conversation, that purpose is important, and purpose is what's going to really define who we are without having the labels that society needs to put on us. And at the end of the day, I want to just, and this is my Christian background, I want people to be able to see themselves when they look at me, because when they see themselves in me, they'll see themselves as Christ.
One of the great gifts of having so many preachers on one panel is that you get incredible words of wisdom. One of the great challenges is that at the drop of a hat, any one of us could just preach. Because, well, okay, we have a couple of minutes. We are on time, panelists. I want to thank you for that. Yeah, I could run around the room and shout right now when I think about the goodness. So anyway, our next part of this is a discussion around the risks and the joys of co-creating with God. Now, one of the things that I think is often, and Carmarian, you mentioned this, people will sometimes say, or usually one of the first questions I get, do you feel like God made a mistake? And my answer is always absolutely not. And if God made a mistake, it was really an over-assessing my wherewithal to deal with this journey. I believe I was intended to be just as I am, this wonderful holy hybrid. I can find myself in the Bible as a gateway for all of Gentile Christianity. My ancestors opened that gate for other non-Jews to become Christians. But when we're co-creating, whatever our belief system is, or our set of belief systems, what does that mean to be on the ground, walking in a world that misunderstands us frequently, and to continue to co-create with God in our journey? And I want to start with you, Renee, because I loved the statement you made about being a Christian on parole. I sometimes feel like a Christian on parole, except that what I recognize is that I'm on parole from religion. I am not on parole from relationship. God does not need religion for relationship. So if I may be so bold as to be a jailer, I am tearing up your parole papers. You are in full relationship. Come on home. Religion can do whatever it needs to do. God's got you. But talk about your own ways of trying to co-create, specifically you, of trying to co-create outside of the rigidity of religion and outside of the difficulty with family, because yours is a specific journey.
That's interesting. I think I got baptized about 7 years ago. It was a thing that was on me that I really wanted to happen. And I don't know how many of my friends know that my mother, she died in 1979 when she was 26 years old. And my older siblings were baptized, but the younger siblings weren't at that time. So while I was going along doing my HIV prevention and education here in Memphis, I met a lady that was working at Planned Parenthood, and we talked a lot. And I had told her, I said, I really would like to get baptized. I feel like it's something that's really important to me that I have to have happen. And she told me, she said, you know what? You can meet with my pastor. So I went and I had lunch with her, her pastor, and one of my siblings went with me. And her pastor asked me a few questions why it was important, you know, this, and this. And then she was like, you know what? For anyone that has turned you down, she said, I'm going to say yes. She said, but if you got to do all the required stuff that we ask of you, and we're going to make it happen. So I went through the process, and I did the classes and everything she was asking of me. And I got baptized at this church here in Memphis called Freedom Chapel, which is affirming. I don't really like when people try to label a church as like a gay church, or because you are affirming that it's a gay church. I don't think any churches are gay. It's just that they are affirming. So it's Disciples of Christ. I got baptized. So I did all the steps backwards. After I got baptized, I joined the church as a member. And she was like, you're doing all of it backwards, but you're still getting the steps done. Also, when it comes to like some of my family, I don't have a relationship with them, but they are like really churchified people. It's kind of strange because, you know, I never heard I love you until I was in my 30s from some of my relatives. And I think it was a process for them and it was a process for me. I think there's some healing and transformation within saying those words to people. That's the reason I'm not so willy-nilly to tell you I love you. Because if I tell you, I mean it. But other than that, I still feel like those deeper connections, deeper religions, sometimes I wonder if I just did not decide to be so individual, would those people still be in my life or not? But I don't have to worry about not knowing because I decided to go ahead and be the most ultimate and unapologetic me that I could be in that time. So I'm still doing that. So.
I want to invite you, each of you, as you feel led, to discuss about the risks and the joys of co-creating your journey, to speak up as you feel led.
I'll pick up preferring what Renee left off. Let me first start by saying I always enjoy when we can have conversations about co-creating with the divine. I think it's important. I think it's this important conversation for those that are trans-identified because we were thought of in Genesis. We are the Adam and Eve. We are the one that even when we hear the text dividing us, it is still one. I always like to tell people comically, I'm from the South, honey. We drink Kool-Aid. We like fried chicken. Thank you, Pastor Shania. But we like some red Kool-Aid to go with it. And, you take some water, take your Kool-Aid pack, and you take your sugar, and you mix it all together. But the content of that drink is still water. It is still one that's there. And what I like, and I hear Bishop Flunder speak about this, even in my own narrative of I guess, being a trans theologian when I'm articulating or providing hermeneutics to scriptures, is that we are also co-creating with God because here in the earth, we are the Elohim. And you have to hear Bishop Flunder use her example, and I've adopted hers versus mine. But, as a woman of trans experience, and there is still that other side that I cannot bury, but I must give reverence to. I must give reverence to that boy's side. Matter of fact, when I see my identical twin brother, when we're visiting, I love on him just as much as because that is a replica of who I was previously that I can still see here in the earth. And I honor that in order for my oneness to stay connected. And so co-creating with God is understanding we as trans-identified, we don't have to bury anything. I understand, but listen to me, we don't have to bury anything of our past. It really is the past that really has prepared us for who we are, where we are now, and how we're going to be ushered into our future. I often like to think about co-creating with God when I don't speak about the Old Testament, but even when I go into the New Testament, honey, I'm a Gentile. And what I can remember being a Gentile is that whatever requirement that we are still preaching in this fundamental context, I am a Gentile as long as I believe. Come on, somebody. I receive salvation. And you said it easier as long as that relationship is there. So everything at times that I hear that is preached against those that are trans-identified, gender non-conforming, they have hot names for it, which is very offensive. But at the same time, I have to remember there is no Greek nor Jew. We're all one. And so I will also like to add too, and this brings me to what Renee was stating and congratulations on your baptism 7 years ago. Growing up Pentecostal, baptism is very important to us. As I've gotten older, I appreciate baptism, but I don't just emphasize baptism. Let me let that sink in. I like to look at baptism because there's a lot of things. I almost want to ask Renee, well, Renee, did you get baptized in the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, or did you get baptized in Jesus' name? That's, and the reason I bring that up is because if we emphasize more on this baptism, which I really do believe in, we minimize also the understanding of having a relationship with Christ and having a relationship with the divine. And that relationship with the divine allows us to have a relationship within ourselves. It allows us to empower ourselves. It allows us to be able to affirm ourselves even when no one else is affirming us. I often say from Hebrews 12 and 14, I grew up on the scripture, without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Y'all remember that? Without holiness. I'm like, okay. And then I start realizing I get it. I understand the definition of holiness, but as a trans person, I realized that without being whole, I will not be able to see the Lord. Not seeing the Lord from how we preach in the afterlife, but seeing the Lord that's within me to live out my truth as Jesus did in the New Testament. And although Jesus was crucified, see, Louis, you starting. Even though that Jesus was crucified, there was still a resurrection. And I believe that that's the season that we are in when we're having this conversation. We will live and we will not die. Although that we've had some siblings go on and now become our ancestors, and their attackers and their accusers have not been caught, we now live out their story to keep the journey going. So, that's why relationship is so important, that once we take a dip, it's important that we understand that our wholeness comes up out of that in order to be who we are, because that is the essence of co-creating with our divine, and that is because of relationship.
Excellent. I just want to take a stab at it, just to kind of come on the end of what Minister Camarion and Renee were saying, is that, first of all, I think that it's an honor and a privilege, right, to be even invited to co-create anything with the divine. And so the way that I see it is it's a calling to push faith and faith community in a way that the Holy Spirit is leading us in this season. If you think about, I think this is almost like a revolutionary Kairos moment that's happening right now, where folks who have previously been marginalized are becoming more a part of what is normalized in faith and tradition. This December, I'll be ordained 13 years and have been pastoring for 13 years. And in that time, what I've come to realize is, as Louis just said, that there is a big difference between relationship and religion. I think religion is in need of a remix. Relationship is what's steady and constant. And in that relationship, I realized that the calling to push religion to a place where Christ is leading us is an honor and a privilege. And so, in fact, we are being called into a prophetic stance in this season to do the work of understanding what God has already made place for and what God has already ordained, that God does not make any mistakes. That's not even, I agree, that's not even a part of the conversation or the narrative. But what it's saying is that God is now showing and spreading some light into some places that the church had left dark. And so it's our job to be a prophetic voice in this season.
Oh, you know what? There might be a whole Pentecostal prayer meeting starting up in here in a minute. Mo, Yoon, which of you would like to say something?
I'll say something. It's very interesting. I come from a evangelical background, predominantly. I dibbled and dabbled in a few of them, and there was a reason for that. The reason was because I could not hear God in the people who were talking about God. I heard a lot of lip service. I heard the do's and the don'ts. You can't, you cannot, you can do this, you can't. I heard all that, but I was not hearing God in what they were saying. And it made me wonder, and it made me back off from religion to move towards what some people would call spirituality instead. Because to me, that encompassed so much more. So much, because religion was so narrow. It was so, and what I was hearing was such a condemnation of who I was, not only as a trans person, because I was hearing this before I even knew I was trans, right? I was hearing it about all the other letters in our grouping, right? But I was hearing it against just people within the same faith. You begin to hear, and it's like, something's not right with this. Something is not right. And I began to hear God for myself. And I was like, how can these people tell me that there's something wrong with me when I am hearing God? Talk to me directly. Literally, God made me get up out of my, listen, I used to there was a church I went to for years. And I sat in the same seat. I had my tambourine bag with my Bible bag. I had the same spot. I was on all the boards. I was in the choir. I was a leader in the choir. I did all those things. And then one day I sat there in that spot and I heard God tell me, literally, listen, I heard it. Get up. It's time for you to go. I didn't say any of that stuff that they're saying. And when you hear God like that, you still sit there for a minute because you want to make sure that you're hearing what you're hearing. And I heard it again. It's time to go. It's time to get up. It's time to leave. And sure enough, when I heard it that time, I was like, okay, that's it. And I got up. I grabbed my stuff, put my tambourine back in my bag, put my Bible back in my bag, went and got in my car, and I left. And I have not been back since. To me, that's co-creating with God. To me, that's participating with God. And those who know me, they know I always talk about, well, how are you participating with God? How are you participating? You know, you say that you want X, Y, and Z, but what are you doing to get there with God? We don't do anything in and of ourselves. It is all in co-creation. It is all in participation with what God and how God will lead you. You just got to listen. But not only do you listen, you have to participate, because there ain't enough to just sit. I could have sat right there and just not moved, because I could have believed that they were telling me what they were telling me, which would have been that you ain't heard from God. God wouldn't have told you to be no trans person. God wouldn't have told you to be no lesbian. God is not a lesbian. God is not trans. Well, God is all of that. Whatever God creates, how God creates it and how it manifests itself, God is a part of it, period. So I know that I am who I am, that I am that I am, because God is, period. I don't need nobody to tell me no more than that. God says, I am that I am. So if God is I am that I am, then I am because I am. I don't need nobody to tell me anything else. And I keep it real simple like that. And the reason why I do it that way is sometimes, and this is not no reflection on anybody else here, okay, let me be clear. But sometimes we just get too convoluted. We just say too much. And sometimes the people don't get it. We have to keep it simple. And I try to keep it that way. It's like, okay, is God talking to you? Yes. Okay. That's all I need to know. So let's move and let's make some moves and do some things. So that's where I am. Yes. Co-creating with God. It's a must. It is a must. And to just help people to see that clearly is the wonder of my life. To people see that light go off in their mind and in their spirit, in the very center of them, that they understand what namaste actually really means. That they actually understand the Jesus in me loves the Jesus in you. That those two phrases, namaste and Jesus loving Jesus in me and the Jesus in you, means exactly the same thing. And that it overrides spiritually in all religions, in all spiritual paths. It is all there. We just have to want to see it and ask God, give that to me so I can see clearly who I am in you and who we are to one another relationship. I hope that makes sense.
It made all kinds of sense to the mind and to the spirit. I want to remind and invite people who are tuning in with us that if you have questions, you should put them in the chat, Facebook Live or Zoom, so that they can be forwarded to us. We are not looking at the chat stream. So if you weren't at the beginning when we began our introduction and we invited you to join us with your questions, you may do so. Mo, I want to hear from you, and I'm going to start with, I want you to answer that question, but I also want you to share, if you would, and we'll go another round with, what are some of the risks and joys that you've experienced in actualizing who you are, inhabiting who you are?
Absolutely. That's actually where I was headed with it. Listening to all of you all, I'm hearing so much about like purpose and what it was like to feel like this calling and what it was like to pick up that calling and go forward. And it had me thinking a lot about, and I love how it's phrased, risks and joys, but it had me thinking a lot about my own experience. I think the risk for me has been, it's two-part, but I'll go with the first part of this. The risk for me in co-creating has been that that worry, or there's fear, this fear that comes from ego, and we say edging God out. There's this fear that arises inside of me that people aren't going to accept me. Someone said it earlier that people may present to me and say, God doesn't believe this, or they have their own version of who God is that fits for them, and they won't accept me for how I experience God. So there's that fear. And when I'm confronted with that, and I think in my experience it's happened a lot actually, I also have an identical twin. And so my identity was so rooted in that experience, and we were super femme together. And now my sister is still who she is and beautiful, and I love her for that. And having my identity so rooted in that experience, and then becoming who I am now and who I'm going to be, has been like challenging in some ways, because the narrative had to evolve with me. So do you tell people you're an identical twin, or do then they start questioning too much what that means? And then if I'm telling them that, am I telling them too much of my narrative? But then who am I to withhold my narrative from them? Because that's so much of who I am. That's my story. And so that if I'm not telling my story, I'm not telling my highest truth. And that doesn't really feel like the work that I'm wanting to do in relationship with people. So I really love how we're talking about like relationship with God and relationship with others and community, and how important it is to share our purpose, our callings, our stories. And it just really resonates with me on this very personal level, that my narrative, I'm always at this interface. That's what I started talking about earlier, of am I sharing my narrative with people while I'm in process? Or am I kind of editing it, revising it, sharing when I feel like it's good? That's the risk for me, holding on to parts of who I am in spaces, and not showing up as my full self, not setting boundaries with people, a lot of different things. I'll leave that there for the risk. But the joy has been when I do have many moments where I'm overcoming that, I can see the product of that co-creation, that manifestation, the moments where I feel like I've really let my ego take a backseat, and I've allowed God to like really manifest things in my life. And I've not kind of tried to micromanage God. Sometimes I felt like I was trying to focus on what God had to do, and I wasn't doing my part of co-creating, which was my internal work, which is my sharing the narrative. Sometimes I'm like focused on what God is over there trying to do for me, and I'm like, I'm not doing my part. So I feel like that's been a joy to see when we collaborate together, when I really feel like I'm tuned in and I'm listening, to see the narrative unfold in these really beautiful ways. And there's so much more evidence on the other side in my joy, that the risk doesn't even matter in so many moments. So I'll pause that right there, but I really appreciate where we're going with this risk and joy. It's just really beautiful to listen to all of you all.
Mm-hmm. I want to share something about risk and joy. And we have a question, which I will raise in just a moment here. You know, one of the risks that I have taken is to be visible when I have the privilege of blending. And not every trans person, however they identify, has the privilege of not being called out and questioned. I have that privilege. And the risk I take is to be visible, because for those who will join me out in the world, to be able to look and go, wait, what? And maybe have someone they can talk to about their own journey is important to me. One of the joys of that same thing is having someone email or call me and say, you know, I've always been feeling this way, but I didn't know another Black man. I didn't know another grown man. I didn't know another man of faith. I didn't know another man of recovery. I didn't know another person like me. I thought I was the only one. The risk that I take and the joys that I have in assuring someone that not only are they not the only one, but we ain't even the only two, has made it really worthwhile. And, you know, again, Carmary and I both came into transition at a time that was pre-internet, where you didn't have a group and a thing and a this and Google and all that business. If you didn't know nobody, you didn't know nobody. And so most of us felt like it was us. It was us. And I'm going to go even further, because I'm going to be transparent. Y'all know me like this. It was us and that sissy your uncle told you about that they went to high school with 250 years ago. You know, we always been around. We've always been around. My grandmama, my great-grandmama, your great-grandmama knew one of us. We may have called it by a different name, but we've always been here. And the thing I will question to all of my siblings of faith who are not of the trans experience and who are not aligned with us is, I want you to go back and ask yourself, is God calling you to be Philip and to jump up in that chariot, even though your boys don't know why you're getting in that chariot with that eunuch, but because God sent you there. I want you to ask how much Philip is in your journey. Don't question my journey. I came, Candace sent me. I'm in the chariot. How much Philip is in your journey? Ain't nobody asked you to scrutinize who I am, but you need to ask yourself where your Philip is. And I want to go to this question real quick and ask y'all, okay, the question is, what would you say to the family member who might be watching, who has had a very hard time to accept their relative who transitioned and are in process because of religion, shame? So I'm going to reframe this question a little bit. This sounds to me like someone who is watching who they're having a hard time with acceptance because of their understanding of religion, because of their shame, or because of their concern about what other people will think. First of all, thank you for asking the question. You are not alone. There are many, many, many people who are wrestling with, this is my loved one, but I don't think this is right. How do I support them? My first answer is it's not about you. And if your religion is teaching you something other than love and support, shift your religious narrative, because God is telling you this is a Philip moment. They are who they are because God has designed them to be that. Who are you to question God's handiwork? Get with some people that can support you in working through your shame and your fear and your misunderstanding. Just pray for them and give them love, your transitioning relative, but get you some support. You're the one that needs support right now. The community, we got them. We got them. Send them our way. We got them. You need some support about who you get to love and who you get to not love based on what you've been taught. I open the floor to other answers and also to discuss the risks and joys of your journey.
I want to jump in. I coined this phrase for my relatives at the time that may not have understood me, because I've always kind of been a person who played with gender roles. And so I always say that understanding is not a prerequisite of accepting. You don't have to understand the process to accept that person and support that person in their process. You don't have to understand. Just like Lewis said, it's really not about you. It's about, are you going to make this a hard process for the transition? Or are you going to make it an easy process and be supportive? And let the person be unapologetically who they are meant to be. I often vacillate on, have I been too individual in telling people who I am? And then sometimes I'm like, you know what? If this is what I have to do to get people to see me, it's okay if I lose a few people along the way. Just like Lewis said, we definitely have them in the LGBTQ, the alphabet people. We got everybody. That chosen family is often better than the born family is. So all I say is, understanding is not a prerequisite of acceptance. You don't have to understand it all. I also want to mention that in my process of doing HIV education and advocacy, there's a lot of time I enter rooms and I don't know how much of myself I'm going to share with the room. I told a story about, I was at a citywide HIV prevention meeting, and the organization I worked for at the time had put me on a panel with a couple of people that were trans. And I was like in this room full of Black people, church people, and I was saying to myself, how much am I going to share? And it got to a moment where I heard this little voice say, it's going to be all right. You can share all of that. So in the process, I disclosed my status to show people that that some of the questions they was asking and some of the stigma around the disease is just a stigma. And I had so many people come up to me at the end, oh, you look good, and this, that, and the other. And I never would have thought that you've been positive 20 years. But that a lot of time when I go into spaces, that little voice in the back of my head is saying, it's okay to disclose and tell people about your experience so that experience can be counted, because they don't know who's in their life that's quiet because of shame and because of stigma and people not understanding. So
thank you so much. I want to turn it back over to Reverend Charisma, and I want to take this moment to thank Dakota for technical support, and to thank Scarritt Bennett for supporting us as a community and giving us this platform to be seen and to tell our truths and to speak. So thank you for that. Rev?
Awesome. There's a few questions. I want to direct the first question to Reverend Shania because of what you do. How can a cis person or a person who is rooted in gender identity yet is committed to justice enter into co-conspiratorship with the trans community?
I think that's a great question. I am fortunate enough to know plenty of folks who are cis and who are extremely strong allies, and not just allies in title, but allies in how they show up in the world. It is, quite frankly, I must say that it has been more of my cisgender, even heterosexual colleagues at work that have been more advocates of my proper pronouns than I've had the opportunity to be. And so I'll be in a Zoom call now, because we live in Zoom Wonderland, or in a meeting, and a colleague will correct. And I've had my boss come back to me even and say, I had another colleague correct me about your pronouns when you wasn't even on the call. And I said, look at God. And so my point in telling that story is the way in which cisgendered or even heterosexual or just mainly cisgender rooted in that type of binary system, folks show up is to be a vocal voice without us having to say do it, without us having to push you to do it, but understanding that if we are about justice and love, then that framework commands you to come alongside those of us who are particularly marginalized in a certain way, and be a vocal voice, to be someone that stands up, to be someone to take the heat, so that we don't have to be re-triggered or re-traumatized all over again. And so I appreciate those who do that work when I'm in the room and when I'm not.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. You know, we've been talking about the joys and the risks. Mo, as a therapist, I'd like for you to talk a little bit, just to give us an idea of the risk, right? That many, particularly teenagers who are, you know, in the process of becoming, who are finding kind of like, or discovering for themselves that they are unique and might not have the kinds of support in their community, in their churches, in their homes. Some of those sometimes are the most violent. So talk a little bit about what risks look like for young folks and how the justice community can come and support young teenagers. Yeah.
For sure. That calls to mind these two processes happening at the same time. So there's the external process, and then there's this internal process. A lot of my work is with the internal process of that. I'll say that really quickly. I like to ask, especially trans youth, to start just envision internally, like close your eyes and think of a world that's just unconditional love, where there is no fear. What would you want your journey, your story, your narrative to look like? And we move from there so that we can free ourselves up from these boxes, these restrictions. That feels closer to justice for me. Not equity, not equality, a world where I create my own narrative, not judged up against someone else's version of who I should be, not in response to someone else's box or binary or category. So I like to start there with my internal work, just freeing us up from any of those other restrictions, and we decide we're co-creating this journey in our narratives. So that's the internal work. And what justice looks like in the mental health, like relationship and therapy, just creating space to do that. From external sources in the community, there's, in terms of like addressing what the risks are, I think there's just so much. When you talk about violence, you talk about schools that are not accepting. You talk about parents who solicit my help to question whether or not they want to help their child get on hormones. You talk about like having to do legal changes. I'm met with a lot of questions about at what age can I be even, is my person even ready? Like my child even ready or understand? All of that can feel like violence when you're just trying to come of age in a world and understand who you are. So there are a lot of risks of being yourself. And I think justice looks like so many different things. It is like creating a lot more access to resources, free resources for mental health, for name changes, for all the external processes, but also the internal processes. It looks like being able to be in church settings. I wish that all of you all were my reverends when I was growing up. Like it looks like going into those spaces where I'm looking at my skin folk, my kinfolk, and also seeing myself as like a trans person. And I'm hearing of trans experience. I'm probably gonna adapt that. So I'm taking that from you all. It looks like not being worried when I'm going to the bathroom if somebody's gonna point me out, which has happened in the middle of a crowded airport in Charlotte. Somebody being like, "You're not supposed to be here." That is the risk of just being myself on like a day-to-day basis, and for a lot of the clients I work with. And so I think justice would really look like some advocacy, some more allyship for amongst like cisgender people. It would look like people working with us to create this kind of world where we're without fear and it's just unconditional love, and we're without all of these restrictions. I'll leave that there. I'll pause that there.
Great. We have a question from the audience. Oh, go ahead, Reverend Eunice. You want?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to just put this in here in the moment when we talk about youth, which is great. But, you know, as a senior citizen, some of those same risks still exist.
Yeah.
You know, during this whole pandemic, I'll be honest, I had a fear because it's like, if they let me go from my job, who is going to hire me at 62 years old? Where am I going to go? How is the senior part of my life, and then going into the elder part of my life, what is that going to look like?
Yeah.
Who's going to help support me? They were just talking about how they're going to get rid of Social Security. But guess what? I've paid into Social Security since I was 17. And now they're talking about I may not even have that. So we need to begin to put stuff in place for everybody. You know, the whole ecosystem needs to be refurbished, because there's the youth on one end, and then there are seniors and our elders on the other end. You know, what does healthcare going to look like for me as a senior trans man of trans experience? What is that going to look like for me? What is housing going to look like for me? What is retirement going to look like for me? And I have concerns about that, because it's not anything that's talked about. Yeah. No wonder in our own community, we're not even talking about what's going to happen. Yeah. You know, we need to begin, and I'll say it, I need to begin to put some things in place, right? But where are those things that I need to put in place? What retirement home is going to take me? You know, my family, is small. I only have 2 people, me and my brother, the only 2 left in my family. You know, I can't necessarily rely on him to take care of me.
Yeah.
right? So where am I gonna go?
Yeah.
I could call Carmarion and say, Carmarion, you got a spot for me? There's no guarantees of any of that. So there are some concerns with the seniors in our community about what is next.
Yeah.
And I think as a community, we need to begin to start thinking about those things as well.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that to the forefront of this conversation. I want to bring Reverend Kamarian. I want to ask you this question from the audience. What has been the ask from family in supporting you in process? How do you ideally need, we don't use allies. We here at Scarritt Bennett Center, we talk about co-conspirator, because allies for us, still have privilege and they get to decide when they enter, when they don't. Co-conspirator, we understand that this is a human issue, a justice issue. Any justice issue is a human issue. And so we remove the privilege and say, this is about my liberation as much as it is about your liberation. Our liberation is bound together. So I'm removing that word ally to insert co-conspirator in this space. But how do you ideally need co-conspirators to show up in this evolution? Not just an emotional support. How do we guard the gates, right? And particularly with the work that you're doing, I'd like to start with you with that question.
So, excuse me. So a couple of things come to mind. I mean, my mind is going, this is a great conversation, and thank you for the co-conspirators, the allyship. I am under the impression that as a senior in the trans-identified community, I get an opportunity to call out. So let me start there first is that we can talk about co-conspirators, we can talk about increasing allyship, but we must be accountable that we are showing up. When the invitation is there, or when we have something that's grassroots, we have to be accountable as well. So it won't seem that our allies or co-conspirators have disappointed us, but in the absence of what we did not do. Let me start there first. The second piece is when I look at the question about perhaps what, and I'm gonna use this from my I statement, what my family, what I did in order to be comfortable, if that came with the name that I wanted to be called by, or my gender, just the comfortability of them seeing who I am in the now, basically. For my I statement first is, and Kamarian is my legal biological name. The Lord was just so gracious, and as a twin, I could have had Cornelius. Y'all understand what I'm saying? So I'm quite grateful. But a couple things that I did, I learned early on, and Louis is absolutely right. I always say that maybe I transitioned during the dinosaur years, but there was no rule book per se, especially within Black families, and me being from the South. So I didn't have the tutelage or the tools to be able to have this rubric of what I should do, and when should I get angry, or when should I celebrate them when they got it right. I didn't have any of that. What I did learn early enough, and I use this because I grew up in church, it's all pretty much I know, is to stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. I remember that at 16, 17, and what I dedicated that in my life is when I used to have high school friends come over, or people that I was dating, when they was like, why are they calling you, male pronouns? It never fazed me. And then as I got older, having conversations such as what you're asking me, which you may have to get someone who may have experienced this, but what I have shared from a spiritual standpoint, it was easier for me to allow them to go through that process, because everyone's transitional process, not just me as an individual, but my family, is going to be different. And I always like to say that there was an opportunity that I allowed that because they were going through their mourning experience. I'm gonna let that soak in. They were going through their mourning experience, but I stayed there. I still loved them. I still showed up. And what I realized is that it was never done intentionally. They were calling me whatever they were comfortable or knew of, because that love is what got my attention. And then years later, just out of the blue, everything just changed. You know, the right pronouns came, and you know, the respect and community language they were using, because I kept showing up, educating them without getting easily offended. And so I like to say that at that moment, we all got an opportunity to celebrate resurrection at that time. They got a chance to mourn. They got a chance to, you know, process whatever they needed. And I was right there when their tomb opened up for them to resurrect, and we all celebrated together. I also am aware that there are things that, because of dysphoria and because of mental, that may not be someone's strength in that particular time, especially in the time that we're living in, when there are options and when there's educational tools. But I will leave this and say, don't discount your presence of continuing to show up. If you got to take the pamphlet, if you got to correct them, you know, respectfully, keep your guards up in a way, but understand when it's intentional and when it's not intentional. And I guarantee you, when it comes to family that loves you, because remember, this is our truth that we are living first. And from there, our truth is then what's going to draw people to the truth that are our light that we're shining because of our truth.
Yeah, awesome. Miss Renee, I saw that you were trying to get on, and I saw that you wrote about the movement needs to be intergenerational. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, because the movement does need to be more intergenerational, because we have a lot of younger people that are coming out, and they need to know the experience of people like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera and those ones that paved the way. But also, it doesn't discount what younger people are doing. But we do have a lot of people that's always pass the torch, go to the house, pass the torch. But we don't need to be passing the torch. We need to be in the movement and continue to show up, like Kamarian said, and do this work. We can do this work together. Ain't nobody gonna starve. We all can eat. It's enough resources. It's not scarce. We're not operating in scarcity. But the movement does need to represent those that are older, those that are younger, and the ones that's coming behind them also. So no one's too old, too young to represent in the movement, but we all can support each other at the same time. And also, I am so glad you said that about allies and co-conspirators and accomplices, because it is easy to say you are ally without being vetted. I need you to be a co-conspirator and put your body in front of my body when we do this direct action, because they might not treat you as bad as they're going to treat me.
That's right. That's
and
right.
you have a different type of privilege, because once they realize that my legal name is Renee, and they're not gonna put me where I'm safe. They're gonna put me where I'm unsafe.
That's right.
Because of how institutionalized and systems are operate. So I just want to mention that I am so glad that y'all get that about the co-conspirators and the allies and the accomplices, because it is so important when doing this movement work that we don't do all the heavy lifting.
That's right.
Because trans people are like, it's 1 million trans folks in the United States. And most of us know each other through movement, but we have to have strong accomplices to help us and lift us up. We can't do it by ourselves. That's also like with anti-racist work. We can't ask Black people to do all the heavy lifting when white people are doing none of the lifting.
That's right.
You have to ask those that have that's rooted in privilege to lift us up.
That's right.
And say, I'm going to go to bat for you because I see my neighbor Renee wants the same thing like me. They just want to buy a house, have a dog, have a partner, and live a nice life. They're not doing anything that's not normal.
That's right.
So we need those allies and accomplices to lift us up and support us when it's important.
Great, awesome. So I want to go back for my last question. I want to go back to Shania, but I want to invite Lewis and Eunice, particularly Lewis, because we haven't heard your voice in a while. But I want to go back to you, Shania, because you actually lifted this up in an example of what a co-conspirator looks like, particularly when you're not even in the room. Pronouns is a big deal in this particular community. So I want you to talk a little bit more why pronouns is a big deal, and even how we can enter into this co-conspiratorship just as simple with pronouns, right? Like, why is that such a big deal, right? Why is and how can we advocate even when, I love what Renee said in terms of, jumping in front of, right, you, so that I take the hit before you take the hit, right? Why is that so important? So talk a little bit, if you will, around pronouns and why that is such an important part of justice work in this conversation.
Louis, you about to say something?
Yeah.
Say that again.
Oh, I thought I saw your hand. You were about to say something.
Yeah, I actually want to say something really quickly before you go there, Rev. I want to challenge those of us who are binary trans people to be co-conspirators. We need to be the model of interrupting binary language, because actually our cis friends are doing a much better job than we are. We flat out are bad at it. The other thing I want to say that I think is really important in terms of how we other each other, the majority of the communities who fall under communities of trans experience are straight and heteronormative. The majority. And so when we do this weird othering thing, we're forgetting the most of who we are. So most of us are straight and heteronormative and binary. And we also need to be better accomplices to our queer, non-binary, and gender non-conforming trans community. We need to be leading the cis people in this movement. Y'all can join us, but we need to step up our game. That's what I'll say.
That's why I love my big brother Lewis, and I agree with that 100%. As it concerns your question about pronouns, for me, and I can't profess to speak for everyone in the trans community nor the queer community, but what I can say for me is that when you make an effort to go beyond what you consider to be the correct English vernacular and to use the correct pronouns, for me, that means you see me the way I see myself. Yeah. That you see me with the lens that society tells you to see me with, but that you've actually taken the effort to see me the way that God sees me and I see me, and you realize that it's not your job to define me, and that it's my job to define myself for you. I constantly say, I do a lot of couples counseling, and I constantly tell people that you teach people how to treat you. That's right. So you mad about the way somebody treats you? You've taught them, whether overtly or covertly, how to treat you. And so what I'm saying is treat me in a way that shows that you respect me, that you see me, that you hear me, and that you know me to be exactly who I'm telling you I am. That's my integrity I stand on, and that's the integrity I need you to give as example as well, to reciprocate to me. And so that's why pronouns are important. It might seem like a small thing. I've even had a gay person tell me, oh, I just don't understand. I can't do it. It's too much work. Really? Really? I say get your life. But in that whole instance, it's like you need to be able to release the bounds and the chains of heteronormative patriarchal white supremacy that tell you to operate and show up in a certain way, and let people be free to be who they're gonna be.
That's right. Yeah. Would anybody else like to add? I mean, I wouldn't want to come behind that, but
when Reverend Shania was speaking, I learned this tool many years ago from another trans colleague, and I have actually used it. I mean, we go through a drive-through, they can't see us, but there's still an educational moment. And so, you know, whichever assigned gender is on the microphone, you know, they'll respond. If it was me, they will say, "Is that all, sir? Okay, thank you, sir. That would be such and such. Is there anything else I can give you?" And it's, of course, if I give the opposite of what I perceive or what I know and say, so if it's you know, if it was like, "Is there anything else, sir?" I would say, "No, ma'am, that's all that I need. Thank you so much." And so by the time we meet up at the window, you know, there's deer with headlights. And then I take that as an opportunity to say, you know, maybe reducing your binary, you know, because you're behind a window and you really don't see me, but I was quite offended that you misgendered me just based off, you know, the love of my tone or my voice. I have a cold today and I'm not feeling well, but I am slightly offended. You know, I go all up. I use as an example is that, you know, we have to be bold enough and creative enough, you know, to throw it back on them where it's in a way that also will get their attention. And I appreciate what Reverend Shania said. It is our responsibility, but it's their responsibility to make sure that they're respecting us as well. I'm under the impression if that doesn't happen, I give them a taste of their own medicine, and I do it very loudly.
Awesome. I want to say thank you for each of you for being here, for sharing your stories, for inviting us into this conversation with you all. I understand the risk. And so thank you for trusting Scarritt Bennett Center in this hour to be in conversation with you. As we close, I want to invite, beginning with you, Eunice, if you would just share your closing remarks as we leave this space. I want to invite our audience members to say this was part one. Part two is next week, where we dive deeper around justice and the injustice that happens in the trans community and what justice could look like if we all took on the role of co-conspirator in this hour to stand in front, like Renee said, to stand in front of the trans community so they're not taking the kinds of hit that they consistently take, which in very much is violent. Trans people are dying, literally. And so next week, join us as we enter into this conversation to go deeper around the work of justice. But Eunice, I want to invite you, if you would share your closing remarks as we close to leave this place.
Okay, so first of all, I'm so honored to be among so many wonderful people. This is just like, I've gotten so much out of this. And I do appreciate the work that you guys I'm sorry, I'll back that up. I do appreciate the work that you all are doing to get the message out, to get it out. It is a risk, but there's so much joy. There's joy in who I see here, but there's also joy in seeing those who will be supported by what we do here. That is so important. We must continue to do this work. It has to happen. That's really it. Just love us, because we love y'all. Just love us. If you just do that, as Jesus asked us to do, as every spiritual path has asked us to do, was just to love one another and to do unto one another that which you would want them to do to you. That is so simple. They cherry pick, but they don't cherry pick that one. We're gonna keep pulling that one out. We're gonna just keep pulling it out, because that's really the essence of who we are and who everyone else should be towards us.
Awesome. Thank you, Eunice Coleman. And let me go ahead and say thank you for modeling what going back to correct looks like. Thank you so much for modeling that for us in this place. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your amazing story, and again, for inviting us in this conversation with you this afternoon. Mo Brown, if you would just share with us your closing remarks as we leave this space.
Yeah, thank you for this space. I'm just really reflective today, just thinking about how this space so much feels like unconditional love, just getting to be in community with all of you. And I'm sitting here moved on a really emotional level, that this feels like healing work for me. Even just showing up here, I didn't know when I was doing this that this would be therapy for me, or that this would draw out this like really sensitive, vulnerable part that like wants to show up and be seen here. See, getting emotional because this is like real community. And so this was like a gift to me. And I want you all to see my vulnerability because these moments are so like precious. And so for people like watching this on Facebook, I'm offering that if you have any kinds of encounters with people who are different than you, especially like the trans community, that we're also human. And that the opportunity that you have in front of you is to show up and be unconditional love in someone's life. And you never know how valuable that is. Thank you for seeing and witnessing for us today. Me, especially on my birthday. I am so grateful to you all. Thank you.
Awesome. Mo Brown, thank you again for being here. And again, happy birthday to you. We're grateful that you would celebrate your special day with us as we enter into this conversation with you. Thank you. Renee Taylor, thank you again. And would you share your closing remarks with us as we leave this place?
I would like to say that a lot of time on a daily basis that we have to find affirmation of validation. And I feel like validating is just getting your parking ticket stamped and it's not required. But I always say to myself, like, every day I have to tell myself, you are enough. And I want people to know that trans people are enough. We don't have to change anything, or anything we do is for us, and we are enough. We are enough.
Yes, you are. Thank you so much, Renee Taylor, for being here and spending your afternoon, Sunday afternoon with us, and trusting us with this space to hold you as you share your stories. Thank you. Reverend Shania Leonard, won't you offer closing remarks as we leave this place?
First of all, once again, as everyone has said, I echo the opportunity to be in this holy space with these voices, and I appreciate that and do not take it for granted. And so I thank you, and I thank all my fellow panelists who've shown up today and done an awesome job. I also want to say that I hope people take away from this what Lewis was alluding to in the beginning, that there is no monolithic voice in the trans community or under the trans umbrella, that we are all different, have different experiences, come from different journeys, different walks of life, and bring to the table our uniqueness, which is our gifting. And I just hope that is echoed and highlighted and uplifted, and that's what you walk away with, that we all come from this different points of view. I'm looking forward to next week, and I can't leave this panel without saying shout out to Philadelphia, the greatest city in the world, where I come from. Always a West Philly girl. Oh, person. Sometimes I misgender myself. See how that happens? That's because I'm old.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you and all the ways you shared and taught us. I mean, you kind of gave us a little church this afternoon as well. So thank you again for being here, sharing your story, and trusting us with this conversation. Reverend Kamarion Anderson Harvey, will you share your closing remarks with us?
Absolutely. Thank you again for this invite and this invitation rather. What an awesome opportunity to hear my colleagues and my siblings and their voices. I'm hoping that it resonated with the vision and that our audience was truly blessed. 3 things that just come to mind for my closing is one, is that what we may not have shared is that even though our journeys are different, I would like to say that we still get the short end of the stick in society. So policy is important. We have to understand policy. We have to understand equality policy, which leads me to my next point. We must go to the polls and vote on Tuesday, November the 3rd. This is going to be the most important race that I feel in my time, because we need some relief, Saints. We need some relief. And we have equality candidates who have been endorsed by the Human Rights Campaign that we feel will make a difference for the entire LGBTQ community, which includes this family and the conversation that we're having. And the final piece that I'll say is I coined a riddle many, many years ago, and I would like to offer that to your audience as my closing. And it goes like this. If he is she and she is he, who are they? They are we, and we are one. So when you look at me, you should see yourself, because certainly when I look at you, I see myself because I'm whole.
Reverend Kimarion D. Anderson Harvey, thank you. Thank you. You missed church this morning, but you sure brought church. Thank you so much for the ways in which you have helped us to see anew this afternoon. Lastly, but certainly not least, our moderator, Lewis Mitchell. Thank you so much, Lewis, for your yes to this very important work, your yes to the ways in which you show up in the world. And so won't you share your closing remarks for us as we leave this place?
It is an honor to do this work. I'm going to say some simple things. I am a man. I am a holy hybrid. I'm an intentional man. I became a man on purpose. I am a child of God. I am of divine creation. I am my mother's son and my daughter's father. I am my lady friend's old man. I am in an exclusive heteronormative relationship, and I am living in a world that if I were to peel back the many pieces of who I am, might choose to leave me by the side of the road bleeding because their religion tells them that I'm not worthy. Every single day, every time I leave my house, I run the risk of being shot down like a Black man and left to die like a trans person. That is my reality every single day.
Reverend Lewis Mitchell, thank you again for leading the way this afternoon by moderating this conversation and for sharing your stories and for trusting us to enter into this conversation and hold this space with you this afternoon. To all of our audience members, faithful audience members who show up every Sunday, thank you. Thank you for doing this work with us, and we can't wait to see you next week. Till next time, God bless you. Bye-bye.